Welcome to the Pivot Point Podcast. This season, I'm focused on sharing stories and ideas from experts on diversity and inclusion. This episode, I, Julie Kratz, am going to share some stories and ideas about Black History Month. Together, I plan to leave you with some actionable tips to think about and discuss with your organization. I share this information because inclusive leadership is a journey. It requires bravery and courage, and you do not have to do it alone. At Pivot Point, I believe we are stronger together. We are one. So this week's topic is about Black History Month, and we're about halfway through the month here in the United States where we choose to celebrate this in the month of February. And it's been really interesting reflecting on kind of the first half of activities. So a couple things that I've done and that we can certainly link to in the show notes is participated in a webcast with my friend and collaborator Erica Young that has also been on our show. And she shared some really great ideas as far as podcasts, books, movies, documentaries, all sorts of places where you can get content, can get information if you're curious and hungry to learn more about what Black History Month is, why it came to be, and then more importantly, why it's really all of our histories to celebrate. And so especially as somebody that might identify as white or not a person of color, I think sometimes it leads to the perception that this is not my history to talk about, that I'm not supposed to be a part of this conversation. And as Erica and I readily share in our webcast that's recorded and hosted on YouTube is, it really is all of our roles. And especially if you feel uncomfortable about the subject or don't quite know how to start the conversation. Okay, it's Black History Month. Like, what do we talk about? Whether that's with your kids or maybe it's in the workplace. A lot of times leveraging some existing content can really work. Now, the other side of that coin, as I recently discovered with a client that was struggling with Black History Month and how do we celebrate it, their employee resource group that was more about multicultural diversity wanted to watch a movie together. Great idea, right? But it became quite a slippery slope and the perceptions changed when it's like, let's all make popcorn and sit kind of in a cinema style and it's going to be this enjoyable experience. And there really wasn't going to be a discussion afterwards. And so my client thought, this feels a little tokenizing, right? This feels a little bit like, okay, I'm going to watch this movie and have a great experience, have my popcorn like I'm at the movie theater and walk away and be done with it. And so I caution you on that approach, especially in the workplace. That might be good with small children, but it's much more about the discussion afterwards. So much of this journey in something like racial diversity and multicultural diversity and African American history cannot be sealed up in a nice little bow and packaged in the form of a movie, and you've checked the box that you suddenly are awoke and understand all the complexity of our hundreds of year history. And so I think the discussion afterwards is really important, and maybe asking people on their own time to watch the movie, the podcast, the book, whatever it is, come prepared to have a discussion. And in particular, I think if you preempt the conversation with, we're going to discuss A, B, and C things for the movie, the book, the podcast. And there's a fantastic podcast out there that really does take some time commitment, but you could certainly dabble and listen to a few episodes rather, called Seeing White. And Erica and I talked about that one in particular on our webcast about really helping us in our journey about what whiteness means, right? A lot of times we don't even have to say something about what it means to be white. It's just in fact implied to be the standard, and that people of color have to qualify their race by their color, and people that are in the majority group, that tends to be white, do not. And so it's really interesting to unpack that narrative and to understand race as a construct, and we're all living in a system that supports racism still today, and that really is step one. I went also to a local event. So I think one of the things you can do to support Black History Month is go to a local event. And I was fortunate, my library had a guest speaker, a really, really acclaimed author, and had a fantastic career. And his perspective was really interesting. He talked about something new that had not hit my radar around bullying. And our children, especially putting pressure on one another from an African American perspective to say, don't be too white, right? Don't go against the grain and not act like your culture, what it means to be Black and what it means to be white. And he's really pertinent, timely examples happening today with kids taking honors classes that happen to be African American and are bullied by their classmates. And in particular, people of color that, as I understand it, as somebody that hasn't experienced this, is it's kind of stepping out of bounds, stepping outside your place. And it kind of puts pressure on that social narrative. And so if this is still happening today, his guidance, and I really thought it was terrific. His guidance was, one, admit that racism exists, that truly does exist. He provided plenty of evidence to support that conclusion. Yes, I agree. But a lot of white people don't want to say that because then suddenly it's like we're benefiting from something or I'm a racist. That's not what we're saying, that we live in a system of which there is racism. So that's one. The second thing he said that I thought was really, really pertinent was anytime you help a young person of color, that is not lost. Especially young people that are struggling to find their way through these systems. If we choose to help them, that's a gift that's going to pay itself forward for future generations. And I loved that. I thought about myself and how I could mentor or spend time in other communities outside of my own that tends to be more white dominated. So it really gave me some ideas and what a noble purpose, to help young people that are wrestling with these challenges. And really to learn. You learn so much from children in conversations around diversity. And then the third thing that he offered was, and this really struck me, I got chills listening to him speak about, recognize that anytime someone's gifts are not able to be given, that we limit someone with stereotypes or bias or signal to them that they do not belong or they cannot do this because of their skin color, that we all lose out. All human beings lose when someone is deprived of giving their gift. And again, he gave several examples, the book, movie Hidden Figures, about female astronauts and, that they were a huge part of us landing on the moon and beyond, and how to navigate space. Many other medical marvel examples that I just didn't know. I didn't know who the inventor was of some of these really, really medical advances. And he made the point that we would have less people here, that we've saved lives by not limiting people, by people breaking through the barriers in the system. And so why would we want anyone to hold back, right? Especially as something as insignificant as someone's skin color. And so that's been an interesting journey. I've also went to a couple other local events. So for listeners wrestling with, what do I do to celebrate this? Just look around. The opportunities are everywhere. Our local chapter here of Girls Inc. also had a guest speaker from Zimbabwe this week. So I had a chance to hear her story and growing up, where she had 5 children by the age of 18 and how that system of inequality was broken when some ally asked her, what are your dreams? And she went on this, overcoming many, many barriers between identifying dreams and living the dreams. But she now speaks on stages about this and helps women back in her home country and has partnered with Oprah and many others. So it was just really chilling to hear her story. And I have to say, both of those opportunities, I'm very thankful for the gift to have these events in my community. But there are lots of places you can go for information. Simply going to your library and checking out a few books, or just seeing the displays of Black History Month and showing your support. I know I took my daughter to also look for some books on Black History Month, and we sat down and had a discussion. I will say, I talked about this on my Inclusion School podcast, my partner podcast with Simone Morris, that it was hard because she asked about Martin Luther King and in particular, why he was killed. And I got very uncomfortable, and I was texting my friend Simone, who is African American, and saying, this is why white people don't talk about this. This is hard. It's a hard conversation. Now, I will say that was like day 1 or 2 of the month. Since then, we've had several intentional conversations after, and just little small doses of, she'll ask me, she's 5, 6, just turned 6. And she'll say, what is this month again? What is it called? And what is it about? And so I took her to the author event with me at the library. I'm continuing to show her examples of Black history and stories and movies, and reading those books. And she's asking really good questions about, okay, so I think I understand, Mom. Is it we don't treat people differently based on their skin color. Right. Okay, so just because I have pink skin, that's what she calls it, not white, and someone else has brown skin, right? That is not a reason to treat them differently. I really need to watch out for that. I said, yeah, because in history, people have been treated differently. So I'm not saying that you are treating anybody differently, but historically, this has happened to people over time. And I gave her some stories and examples to help her understand that narrative. So I think sometimes we're afraid to have that conversation with our kids too, but I think about how much better off I would have been had I been having those conversations. I certainly did not with my mother. She grew up in segregated times and quite frankly did say some things that were not helpful from a race perspective. So we don't have to learn this all on our own. There are tools, there are things out there. So please do check out some of the content that we'll link to in the show notes here. Engage in something. And I just ask you, I'm going to leave you with this today. Think about one thing, just one simple thing you can do to support Black History Month despite your skin color or how you identify on race. Please, we need all voices supporting and talking about this important part for all of our history. Did you know that you can find all 5 seasons of our 50 plus episodes at nextpivotpoint.com? There, you can sign up for a complimentary 7-day preview of our new program, Lead Like an Ally, and order our new book, Lead Like an Ally. I appreciate you listening to this episode. Who do you know that needs to hear this message? Hit the share button, connect with me on LinkedIn, simply search Julie Kratz, Kratz. I host this podcast because I believe we are stronger together. We are one.